August 6, 1945, 08:15 hours. Hiroshima, Japan. The summer sky was a pristine, cloudless blue, a perfect canvas. Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, director of the Hiroshima Communications Hospital, had just finished his night shift and was resting on his living room veranda, looking out over the tranquil, sleeping city. The air was still. The drone of a single high-altitude American B-29, nicknamed the Straight Flush by the locals for its lonely reconnaissance runs, was a familiar, almost comforting sound. It meant no major raid was imminent. A citywide alert had sounded earlier, but by 08 bars the all-clear was given. The city was emerging, its citizens heading to work and school. Dr. Hachiya, weary from his duties, felt a moment of profound peace. In his pocket, a letter from his colleague in Tokyo discussed the dwindling medical supplies and the persistent strange rumors of a new city-splitting American bomb. He had dismissed it. It was propaganda, a sign of American desperation. 8:16 hours. It was not a sound. It was a light, a blinding, silent, magnesium-white flash that seared the sky. Dr. Hachiya did not see the plane, 31,000 feet above. He did not see the 9,700-pound object, codenamed Little Boy, that had fallen for 43 seconds. He saw only the pika, the flash. His world dissolved. He was thrown from the veranda, the right side of his body flayed, his house collapsing around him in a tidal wave of splintered wood and glass. Then, seconds later, came the dawn, the boom. A deafening apocalyptic explosion that was not one sound but 1,000 sounds, the roar of a collapsing civilization. He staggered out, naked and bleeding, into a new, dark, twilight world. The city he knew just moments before was gone, replaced by a churning, boiling cloud of black smoke and purple dust. He was, at that moment, utterly, primordially alone. Simultaneously, 08:16 hours. Prime Minister's residence, Tokyo. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, the 77-year-old retired admiral, was preparing for another grueling day. He and the Big Six, the Supreme Council for the direction of the war, were scheduled to meet. The agenda was, as always, the same: how to secure favorable terms for an eventual unavoidable surrender. The hardliners, led by War Minister Koichika Anami, were still resolute. They would fight to the last man, woman, and child, turning the shores of Japan into a bloodbath for the American invaders. The entire nation was being turned into a kamikaze force. Their only hope lay in a single desperate gamble: that the Soviet Union, with whom they still had a neutrality pact, could be persuaded to mediate a peace. At 08:16, as Dr. Hachiya's world ended, the Prime Minister's teletype was clicking with routine reports. The Hiroshima station, however, had just gone silent, and the rumor that had been dismissed as fantasy was about to become the only reality that mattered. By the summer of 1945, Japan was a nation on the brink of total annihilation, yet it was strategically and psychologically incapable of surrender. The Big Six who ruled the country, Prime Minister Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, War Minister Koichika Anami, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, and Navy Chief of Staff Suemu Toyota, were locked in a political stalemate. The moderates Togo and Yonai knew the war was lost. The militarists, Anami and Umezu, believed that surrender under the terms offered at Potsdam, unconditional surrender, was a fate worse than death. It meant the end of the emperor, the end of the national polity, Kokutai, the end of Japan itself. Their entire national strategy was a suicide pact on a colossal scale, codified in a plan called Ketsugō, Operation Decisive. The strategy was not to win the war, which they knew was impossible, but to inflict such catastrophic, unbearable casualties on the initial American invasion force that the American public, weary of war, would force their government to negotiate a peace. This peace would, at all costs, preserve the emperor's divine rule. The plan was a fortress. The entire island of Kyushu, the target of the first planned American invasion, Operation Olympic, had been turned into the most heavily defended piece of real estate on Earth. The Imperial General Headquarters had moved over 900,000 soldiers there. More than 10,000 aircraft, mostly obsolete trainers and biplanes, were being hidden in caves and under camouflage nets, saved as kamikaze, their pilots awaiting their one and only mission. Thousands of Kyryu midget submarines, Kaiten human-guided torpedoes, and Shinyo explosive motorboats were hidden in coves, ready to swarm the invasion fleet. But the most fanatical element was the civilian populace. The Kokumin Giyu Sentotai, or Patriotic Citizens Fighting Corps, had mobilized 28 million men and women. They were being trained, often by high school girls, to fight with sharpened bamboo spears, kitchen knives, and antique muskets. The doctrine was Ichioku Gyokusai, the 100 million shattered jewels. They would all die before they would surrender. This entire massive, terrifying strategy was predicated on one single assumption, that the Americans would have to land on the beaches. It was a strategy based on time, attrition, and conventional industrial-scale warfare. It was a strategy that the event at 0816 on August 6th would render utterly, terrifyingly obsolete. For Second Lieutenant Torao Shikata, a 22-year-old pilot of the 72nd Shinbu Squadron, life had been reduced to a single perfect point of focus. He sat in a dugout at the edge of the Chirin airfield in southern Kyushu, cleaning the simple 250-kilogram bomb that was welded to the belly of his Ki-43 Hayabusa. He was a kamikaze. He and his comrades were the divine wind that would save the nation. His training was complete. He had already written his final letter to his parents, enclosing a lock of his hair in a small poem. He felt no fear, only a strange spiritual impatience. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to the emperor. He was a human component in the great Ketsugō plan. His officers had told him that the Americans, though rich in material, were spiritually weak. When they saw the sky black with thousands of Japanese pilots, each one a screaming, diving incarnation of the Yamato spirit, they would break. Their fleet would be shattered, their transports sunk, and the surviving invaders would be met on the beaches by the bamboo spears of the people. Torao believed this with all his heart. His death would have meaning. It would buy his nation the peace it deserved. Hundreds of miles away, in a suburb of Tokyo, his 17-year-old sister Akiko was also a soldier. She was in her high school gymnasium, drilling with a sharpened bamboo spear. Her instructor, a wounded veteran, barked commands. Aim for the stomach, the soft parts. When the American devil is on top of you, do not hesitate. Your death is a victory for His Majesty. Akiko practiced the lunge, her body aching. She too was ready to die. This was the mind of Japan in August 1945. It was a nation that had collectively embraced death, a nation whose entire defensive strategy was a shield made of 100 million human bodies, each one poised for a final glorious sacrifice. They were waiting for a conventional, comprehensible invasion. They were waiting for a battle. They were completely unprepared for a judgment. The leadership in Tokyo was not in a state of total ignorance. They were, however, in a state of profound, willful denial. The rumor of an American superweapon had been circulating for months. First, there were the German sources. As the Reich collapsed, U-boats and diplomatic cables had carried frantic, fragmented reports from German scientists. They spoke of American progress on an atomic explosive, a bomb of unimaginable power. Japanese attachés in Stockholm and Bern passed these reports to Tokyo, but they were treated with deep skepticism. The militarists in the army saw it as a final, desperate piece of German propaganda, an attempt to keep Japan in the war. Second, there was their own program. Japan had its own, albeit small, nuclear physics research program, led by the brilliant Dr. Yoshio Nishina at the Riken Institute in Tokyo. In 1943, Dr. Nishina had given the cabinet a sobering assessment. Building an atomic bomb was, in his opinion, theoretically possible, but it would require a national industrial effort on a scale even the United States could not muster, and it would take at least a decade. The Japanese had tried. Their NIGO project to separate uranium-235 had failed, their facilities destroyed by conventional B-29 raids. Because they could not do it, they assumed the Americans could not either. Third, there was the black propaganda from the Allies themselves. Leaflets dropped over Japanese cities warned of an explosive force that will carve a new shape in this war. But this was dismissed. It was just another American psychological operation, like the leaflets that warned of the next day's firebombing raids. Also, when Prime Minister Suzuki and War Minister Anami met on the morning of August 6th, their entire reality was based on a single, flawed premise. The war would continue as it had. They expected more B-29s, more fire, more death, but it would be comprehensible death. It would be industrial, attritional, and most importantly, survivable. They expected Operation Olympic. They did not expect Armageddon. Their failure of imagination was the single greatest strategic vulnerability in the empire. At 0816, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters Communications Center in Tokyo received a jolt. The Japan Broadcasting Corporation, NHK radio station in Hiroshima, had gone silent, instantly. The main telegraph line, which ran just north of the city, had also ceased functioning. From the railway control center, the duty officer was frantically trying to raise the Hiroshima station. The line was dead. A small secondary rail yard just outside the city was reached, and the report from its terrified station master was incoherent. A terrible explosion. The city is on fire. We cannot see Hiroshima. Everything is dark. This was the first piece of the puzzle. It was not a rumor. It was a void, an information blackout. The military command was baffled. A conventional B-29 raid, even a massive one like the firebombing of Tokyo, did not sever all communication simultaneously. Bombs fell in patterns. Fires spread. But this was instantaneous. It was as if the city had been surgically, impossibly removed from the map. By 10 all panic was setting in at General Headquarters. They tried to radio the Hiroshima Army Garrison, the headquarters of the 2nd General Army, commanded by Field Marshal Hata. There was no response. The entire command structure for the defense of southern Japan had vanished. By 13 Hao, they received the first, terrifying eyewitness report. A young Kempei Tai officer on a flight from the south had his pilot divert over the city. He landed at Kure Naval Base, his face the color of ash. He was rushed to a secure phone. His report, patched through to Tokyo, was madness. The city of Hiroshima has been annihilated, he stammered. It has been completely destroyed, by a single flash of light. The militarist in Tokyo scoffed. Annihilated? Impossible. A single bomb? It is a lunatic's report. They suspected a massive accidental explosion at the Hiroshima arsenal. War Minister Anami, furious, insisted it was a new American trick. They have spread a rumor of a new bomb, and now they are trying to scare us by claiming a lucky hit on the arsenal. It is a sign of their weakness. We must hold firm. But deep down, the seed of terror had been planted. A city could not just disappear. The moment of realization was not a single instant. It was a 24-hour cascade of information that systematically dismantled the Japanese leadership's reality. The first blow came not from Japan, but from America. At 23 hours Tokyo time, 16 hours after the bombing, Japanese shortwave radio monitors, listening to Allied broadcasts from Saipan, picked up a stunning transmission. It was a pre-recorded statement from the President of the United States, Harry S. Truman. His voice was flat, severe, and utterly unambiguous. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima, an important Japanese army base. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East. We are now prepared to obliterate more rapidly and completely every productive enterprise the Japanese have above ground in any city. We shall destroy their docks, their factories, and their communications. Let there be no mistake. We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war. The transcript was rushed to the cabinet. The militarists, led by Anami, were shaken but defiant. Propaganda, he insisted. A psychological trick. They are trying to scare us into surrender before the true battle. They cannot possibly have such a weapon, and even if they do, they cannot have more than one. The cabinet was deadlocked. The moderates were terrified. The militarists were in deep denial. They needed their own proof, and so the final undeniable blow came from their own side. On the morning of August 7th, the government dispatched Japan's premier nuclear physicist, Dr. Yoshio Nishina, on a flight to Hiroshima. He was the one man in Japan who could confirm or deny the rumor. He arrived in the afternoon. The sight that greeted him was not just a destroyed city. It was the textbook, horrifying proof of his own theories. He saw the shadows of vaporized people burned into the pavement. He saw granite that had melted. His instruments detected massive telltale radiation. He returned to Tokyo on August 8th, a broken man. He went directly to the leadership. His verdict was simple and absolute. The city of Hiroshima was destroyed by a nuclear fission bomb. It is without question an atomic bomb. The rumor was true. The propaganda was fact. The Americans had not just built one. They had used it. The fantasy had become reality. The entire foundation of the Ketsugō strategy, the shield of the 100 million, had just been rendered as fragile as paper. The confirmation by Dr. Nishina, combined with Truman's announcement, plunged the Supreme Council into a psychological crisis. The moment of realization had arrived, but it did not bring unity. It brought a terrifying paralysis. On the morning of August 9th, The Big Six convened in a bunker deep beneath the Imperial Palace. The room was thick with unspoken terror. Foreign Minister Togo spoke first, his voice heavy. The Americans have a new and terrible weapon. Dr. Nishina confirms this. Truman has announced it. It changes the entire military equation. If they can destroy one city with one bomb, our nation will be wiped from the earth before the Ketsugō battle can even begin. We must accept the Potsdam Declaration. War Minister Anami, his face a mask of iron, slammed his hand on the table. I do not agree. The Americans have one bomb, perhaps two. But we can endure. The Yamato spirit is not dead. What is this atomic bomb compared to the spirit of our kamikaze? To surrender now, based on a single new weapon, is a betrayal of the 20 million souls who have died for the Emperor. We will fight. We will force them to land. We will bleed them on our sacred soil. That is the only path left to us. Army Chief Umezu supported him. There is doubt as to whether it was truly an atomic bomb. It is too early to say. We must continue to prepare for the decisive battle. It was a perfect, unbridgeable deadlock. The peace faction, Togo Yonai, saw the bomb as the reason to surrender. The war faction, Anami Umezu, saw it as the reason they must not. To them, it was the ultimate test of their spirit. To give in to a scare weapon was the ultimate cowardice. They argued for hours, the fate of millions hanging on their fanatical pride. The rumor was now reality, but the reality was still not enough. Then, at 11 Kanzu a.m., in the middle of their bitter debate, an aide burst into the room, his face pale, hands shaking. He carried a new dispatch. "Sir," he said, breathing heavily. The Soviet Union has declared war. Their armies are attacking us in Manchuria." It was a hammer blow. The entire Ketsugō strategy's diplomatic component was gone, and as the council sat, stunned, a second aide ran in. A report. "From Nagasaki! A second new bomb has just been used. The city is destroyed." The moment was now complete. It was not one bomb. It was two. And it was not just the bomb. It was the betrayal by the Soviets. The twin pillars of Japan's desperate strategy, the Ketsugō attrition battle and the hope of Soviet mediation, were destroyed in the span of 3 hours. The psychological deadlock was finally, violently broken. The war faction was left with nothing. Anami's denial was exposed as a fantasy. The rumor was not just true, it was repeatable. The Americans, it seemed, had an endless supply of these sun-killing weapons. They no longer needed to invade. They could simply sit at 30,000 feet and erase Japan, city by city, from existence. The kamikaze pilot, Torao Shikata, would never have a fleet to attack. The housewife, Akiko, would never see an American soldier to stab with her bamboo spear. Their sacrifice, the sacrifice of the 100 million, had been rendered tragically, cosmically, meaningless. That night, in the sweltering heat of the palace bunker, Prime Minister Suzuki took an unprecedented step. He called an imperial conference and asked the emperor himself to break the 3-3 tie. Emperor Hirohito, a remote divine figure who had never before interfered with his government, finally spoke. His voice was soft and he wept. "I have given serious thought to the situation," he said. "I have concluded that we must bear the unbearable. I cannot bear to see my innocent people suffer any longer. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also the total extinction of human civilization." The rumor was real, and it had taken 2 bombs, a Soviet invasion, and the intervention of a living God to make the leadership of Japan finally admit it. The atomic bomb was not just a weapon of war, it was a weapon of communication. It was the only message, the only reality, that could pierce the armor of fanaticism and force a nation that had worshipped death to finally, agonizingly, choose life.